but Philly was always my home. So I went to undergrad at West Chester University, which is the closest state school to Philadelphia. And so I could be far enough away that I really needed to live there, but I could come home anytime I wanted. And so that was important to me. Yeah, I mean, that was a big part of it. The other part of it was that I was going to pay for it myself, right? And I had gotten some scholarship offers. I went to a really great high school, and you know, and I did well there. And you know, but I was definitely kind of a standout student, not in the sense that I was like so smart, but because I was smart, but not like super smart. You know, it wasn't the top. I wasn't motivated enough to like be valedictorian or anything like that. Didn't mean that much to me, but I was, you know, definitely motivated as a student, but I wasn't like particularly driven. But I went to a suburban high school, and we had the high school I went to was not at all diverse. Very much like my neighborhood in North Philly was not diverse at all. I was a diversity in North Philly, in Kensington, and I was called every name, right? When the kids, usually the Catholic school kids would, you know, kids who didn't know me would call me names, and I was called Greek and like, you know, any other like, but like they would say Greek in the same way that they would say like a true, you know, slur, right? And so I would get all of them, and I think as kids you don't really know what any of them mean. So like anybody who's different is all of those things. So I got the Asian slurs, the African American slurs, the Latino slurs. I got all of them, and so difference is difference. But so my neighborhood growing up as a kid was very homogenous, right? The distinction really was between ethnic white kids, right? Like, well, I'm Irish, I'm Polish, you know. And in New Jersey, it was the same way, but different. It was very homogenous. The kids were definitely nicer, right? I think city kids are just tough, you know. I remember moving over to Jersey and just being kind of struck by the fact that kids were nice, and I kind of thought that they were like gonna do something to me. It's like, are you trying to like, wait, like, you know, why are you being so nice, you know? But these kids were nice. But it was also a very homogenous setting. In my high school graduating class, it was myself and another student who were the Latino population. There was maybe 4 APIs, including South Asians. And then also there were maybe, I think we had maybe 4 African American students in my graduating class. So it was pretty much like, it was pretty homogenous, right? And that was out of a graduating class of about 130 students. So there wasn't a lot of, you know, I think anybody who was different really stood out. So I had gotten some offers from school. I was one of the only students of color graduating from that class, and I'd gotten some scholarship offers, and it made me mad. Like I didn't feel like it wasn't validating. I was like, I'm like the only Latina girl. I'm the only Latina in this class. That's why I'm getting this scholarship offer, you know. And the reality was, I did well on my SATs. I was a good student, you know. Like I didn't, you know, probably got some of those offers for my grades, you know. But I was just kind of like, I don't know what I was going through, but I was like, any of the schools that gave me offers of like rides, and I got some nice offers, I turned them down. I was like, I'm not doing that. And there was part of me that needed, I think, to know that if I was in a school, is because I earned it and I should be there.
Terrific people, and they would hang in the bars, and just everybody knew them. One was called the Tasmanian Devil. They used to call him Taz. And they all had nicknames like that. And but the era was very unpleasant, particularly, you know, young people had nowhere to turn. I mean, now they have a lot of groups, you know, for young people who aren't out yet. I mean, really teenagers, you know, who are still at home, and they have places where you can get help, but there was nothing like that, you know, back in the days. In fact, if they suspected you, you know, the families were so upset about it, you know, they would just, they could, and in the old days, they could put you in a mental institution if the family thought that you know, had to go and somebody would give you a quick evaluation. A lot of people got thrown in nut houses, you know. the era was so different, you know, than today. And young people don't have an idea what, you know, tormented. And at one time, they put up posters, as crazy as that festival was on Locust Street, you know, the gay, whatever it was, where the hundreds of people would get out and all the drags would come and they go to the pirate ship, they go from bar to bar, and they had roadblocks. It came, some people coming down from New York. It was just craziness, you know, and all these famous people, you know, of the period, you know, that everybody knew, and they knew them in drag and out of drag, you know, and they put up posters that you couldn't wear female attire on Halloween. Well, that's the one time in the world it's legal everywhere in the world, you know. we were walking down the street, and her name was Regina Moskowitz, a woman now departed, and her sister, and she, I don't know, she was wearing some kind of outfit. It was Halloween, yeah, she was dressed, I don't know, like a biker or something. So the cop stuff, they thought it was a drag. And they said, and they threw her up against the wall, you know. And this was before, you know, hormone injections and implants. And she had to say, what do you think these are?
I suppose my biggest non-gay, gay rights activity was the major gay and lesbian march on Washington, and I organized the Philadelphia contingent. Right. And then I also organized the Philadelphia gay contingent to the other big march on Washington for peace and social justice, at which Martin Luther King made his famous speech. Those were the two most prominent of my non-health gay rights activities after that, although there were a number of others, which I won't go into at this moment.
So from the Mayor's Commission, professionally, I went next to work at Choice, which is a reproductive health organization, and I was the PR coordinator there, and that was the first. But when I was at the Mayor's Commission, I volunteered to be staff on the first From All Walks of Life, the first AIDS walk in Philadelphia. And at Choice, it was the first place I kind of worked professionally around issues that included HIV. We had a weekly column in the Daily News that was, because we ran the city's AIDS hotline, and I wrote the kind of Ask the AIDS hotline kind of, we would take questions that we got on the hotline and write them in a question and in answer format for the Daily News. So that was, what year was that? Let's see, I lose track of my own life. I was at the Mayor's Commission probably from 87 to 89 or 90. So then this was the early 90s that I was at Choice. So it was the very beginning of the AIDS epidemic. It was an epidemic, and it was a very big deal for the Daily News to let us have this column. We bought ad space for the AIDS hotline, and then kind of as a trade, they gave us. And I can't remember, I saved them all, I have clippings files, but I can't remember what kind of questions we tried to highlight when we did the column, but we tried to, we tried to dispel some myths, and another big myth was about, you know, it could be casually transmitted, and it was always the, you know, the mosquito question. Can you get it from mosquitoes? So there were a lot of myths about transmission, like could you get HIV if a mosquito bit somebody with HIV and then it bit me, can I get HIV?
And once I got out of college and all and started to work professionally, I knew I wanted to be in Center City. I had friends here, and as I said, we liked the cultural life, so I moved to Hopkinson House over at Washington Square, and I lived there for around 7 or 8 years, and then I decided it was time for me to get over here, so I bought a condominium, and I lived there for around 27 years. So I have been in Center City for more than half my life. Yeah, this is the place for me.
My family originally came to Philadelphia. My mother's family originally came to Philadelphia in the 19-teens. We're our Mexican heritage. My family is originally from Texas, from West Texas, and we trace our roots to back when Texas was Mexico. So that's sort of where my family comes from, is the part of Texas that used to be Mexico. So when the border changed, we were citizens, and like it or not. And but my great grandparents came to Philadelphia. There were a lot of building jobs that were happening. My great grandfather was a stonemason, and so the Ben Franklin Bridge was about to be built, and it rests on stone pillars, and so they needed cheap, skilled labor. And so, the construction companies, were all over, and they were going to go maybe to Detroit, and I know that they lived in Tennessee for a minute before they came to Philadelphia, but they came, and my grandfather worked on the bridge, and I think also on the art museum was built around the same time. That's also a stone building. So they came to be for work. I was raised pretty much in North Philly, then moved to New Jersey for middle school and high school, came back after college, lived in West Philly, and then a couple years ago my partner and I bought a house in South Philly, not far from where I was born. But it's funny, I don't remember living in South Philly. My parents moved before I could remember, and so I mostly grew up in North Philly. K&A, the hood, one of them.
Okay.
Around F and Allegheny is where I mostly grew up.
Okay.
And when I moved to New Jersey, around middle school. This would have been the early 80s, early to mid 80s. Around 82 is when I moved to New Jersey. It had everything to do. I went to public school, and it had everything to do with the fact that middle school I was supposed to go to was pretty dangerous, and I was a short little kid, and the neighborhood itself was getting dangerous. I didn't know this then, but looking back, it was during the time that crack first hit the streets, right? And it was crazy things were happening, but it was very slowly happening, but then it exploded, right? So I had an aunt who lived in New Jersey who was just like, send her here. I pay all these school taxes, I don't have any children. And the school, like I said, I was going to go to was pretty rough, and I didn't want to go to New Jersey. She lives right over in Collingswood, so it's not far. I didn't want to go, but my mom was like, you're going. And the school, my mom still stayed here, and I came back a lot on the weekend. So even though I was away for a few years, my mom was here in town until I want to say I was about 16, and then she got out too.
Definitely my introduction. So the purpose of that organization, and it does no longer exist, but what exists in its place is what Gloria Caceres heads, is the Office of Mayor's Liaison. She is the mayor's liaison to LGBT communities, which is actually, and I guess I don't know if there is still a board that she has, but so we had a commission, a board of directors of sorts, but we were a city. There were a lot of mayor's commissions at that time. There was a mayor's commission on women's issues, on people with disabilities, and there was us, sexual minorities. And the language of sexual minorities was very purposeful because it identified us as a minority worthy of protections and services. And Philadelphia was one of the first cities to have lesbian gay people as a protected class in our, it's the Fair Practices Ordinance. And so what we did basically was constituency services. If someone felt that they were discriminated against on the basis of their sexual orientation in housing, public accommodations, what's the other one? I used to know these. Or whatever else the Fair Practices Ordinance protects against, housing, employment, and public accommodations. So that means public accommodations is like renting or using a restaurant. If they felt they were discriminated against because of their sexual orientation, they could come to us and we could assist, whether they wanted to file a complaint with the Human Relations Commission, which is a very slow and arduous process. It's not like it brings you quick resolution. What we did more often was try to work with whatever that entity was, especially if it was a city agency that they felt discriminated against. Then we kind of had we had entree, so we would go in and kind of do training and kind of smack them upside the head politely that, this is actually illegal to what you're doing. And often it wasn't an outright, I won't serve you because, it was really, I learned a lot of my politics and understanding around gender issues, our transgender folk. People really didn't use transgender at the time. We were a transsexual, but we definitely had young, cross-dressing, mostly, M to F, that were, many of them, their only source of income was sex work, and they were so vulnerable. So I learned a lot. I mean, I hadn't had exposure to that part of the community at all.
I had clients in gay bars that were in the restaurant field, of course, because we were open till 4 in the morning in New York, and they would close the restaurants and then go out for a drink or two. And I met a lot of these people, and they knew I was interested in food because I would talk a lot about it. And ultimately, an offer came, and I took it, and I went into kitchen. Of course, when I started to get out of the bar scene as a bartender was the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, and we were losing people so fast and so many. In a week's time, I remember 1 week going to like 3 or 4 memorial services. And then, of course, there was 9/11, which not only destroyed this country in so many ways, but also caused my business to fail because I had a catering facility in Upper Montclair, New Jersey, and there were 17 cars left in the parking lot at the end of that night, which was right behind my facility. Facility was a storefront, but there were no parties after that. The whole country went into more. But this whole community of Upper Montclair, where my customer base was, canceled all parties for Thanksgiving and all their fall parties because of what had happened. And my business couldn't survive. They ultimately sold the business and my house in Jersey and moved to Philadelphia.
And in fact, on the desk in my office, I had right in the front a photograph of my 2 offspring from a previous marriage to a woman, which ended in a divorce. I, at that time, was comfortable with my being gay, but not comfortable with my being publicly gay. So all of my social life and my friends and all knew that I was gay at that point. But when I accepted this invitation to speak on the Penn campus in this tribute to Howard Brown, nobody that I worked with and none of the public agencies that I was part of knew that I was gay. At the time, I was the regional health commissioner for the Pennsylvania Department of Health. I reported to the State Secretary of Health, Leonard Bachman, and the governor at that time was Milton Schaap, a liberal politician from the Philadelphia area. The invitation to speak at this public meeting caused me to have a fundamental review of my position on being gay. As a result, I concluded that I should be openly gay in public, in terms of public perceptions and understanding. What was interesting is that when I gave my talk on the Penn campus, there were some reporters present, but they did not report that I was one of the speakers. This resulted in a very lucky and fortunate situation for me, because I was then able to think through how, when, and where I should become publicly known as gay.
But that's the way I got to start this job, right? Press conference. It was, I'm told, up till that time, and for some time after, it was the largest press conference that we had had.
Wow.
And so there was a lot of, definitely a lot of support, and I felt the love, you know. And it was really meaningful to me that the first row of folks were a number of my friends, trans women, African American trans women, who I'd worked with over the years. And, you know, usually the first row is your family, right? So my mom and everybody, my cousins are in the second row. The first row is, you know, trans women who are like giving the mayor a hard time, even during the press conference. So I'm just like, that's cool. You know what I mean? Like, you know, the folks who are in the first row see themselves as my family, and I see them that way too. Mm-hmm. And so that was really like a very, very, very meaningful way to start a gig like this.
I hosted a television show on WYBE, which is Channel 35, and now called Mind TV, for 5 years, 5 seasons, 2000 to 2005. And when that was canceled, I've been hosting Amazon Country, a lesbian gay radio program since '96 on XPN. So I'd been working 2 part-time jobs and 1 full-time job for, you know, all that time and juggling it. And when they canceled, and it was just a management decision, that YBE canceled the whole block. 5 days a week in the 7:30 to 8 slot, each night of the week had a different community focus, a live call-in format. So there was a Latino, Philadelphia focus, there was African American, there was Asian, there was lesbian, gay, and there was Friday was the open show, kind of all Philadelphia topics. So they took out the whole series, which was a real great loss. It was a wonderful series. When they did that, it opened up this time in my schedule, because I'd been preparing for a weekly live interview where I was always very prepared. You have to, you know, read people's books, you know, compile your questions. I had a producer that booked my guests for me, which was great, but I generated a lot of the topics. You know, let's find out if we can get so-and-so.
The year that I was in Tübingen, she came to Philadelphia to work for the American Friends Service Committee, which is colloquially known as the Quaker Vatican at 15th and Cherry. And while she was there, she got to know a pretty extended family of folks who had started a food co-op in West Philadelphia, in Powelton Village. And so when the next summer, she went to work at as a part of the Quaker, you know, activity, to work in the Boy Scout camp on the west bank of the Jordan River. And on her way back to the United States, she came to Tübingen, where I and 2 of my students were basically hanging out, trying to figure out what we were going to do next. And so the 4 of us were ready to come back to the United States. And of the options that we knew about, Philadelphia seemed to be the best, because these folks had just started a food buying co-op, and in fact they had just bought a building to house that food co-op, so they were planning on opening a store. But they were moving to Oregon, so they needed to find folks who would run that food co-op. And so that's what we did when we came, and for the next 2.5 years I was the manager of the Ecology Food Co-op at 36th and Lancaster Avenue. I came to Philadelphia on October 9th, 71. And why I remember so exactly is it's my mother's birthday.
Well, I in the period where I quit my job at the Nature Conservancy and was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I started performing my poetry and some original music. And so I had, in fact, I have flyers somewhere that I called myself the Renaissance lesbian, because I was like music, comedy, and poetry. So I had I had never done radio, but when I went to Temple, I thought, oh, college radio would be so cool. And I chose a college that had like a professional radio station. RTI does not have much student input because it's a professional jazz and classical station. So I didn't get to do it then. Excuse me. So I used to listen to Amazon Country, and they had like a temporary host. The Lainey Goodman, who had done it for years, had stopped doing it, and the temporary host said, I'm only temporary, and if you're interested in applying, call the station. I thought, that's a great idea. So I called the station, XPN, WXPN, and at the time they had, I didn't know this then, but I found out later, a series of temp front desk receptionist types who were often either not well trained or not well informed. And so when I called and said I was interested in the host position for Amazon Country, oh, that's filled. She just told me. I'm like, oh, all right. Well, I decided, you know what, I'm going to write and send a fax to the new host because I want to let her know I'm happy to volunteer. I have a lot of women's music, and I had with one of the previous hosts, I guess after Lainey, there was Elena Bouvier was a host. So I had read some of my poetry on the air with her. Mm-hmm. And I had actually also lent her music because Carol, my partner, at the time had an even bigger women's music collection than me. And all of the hosts have always just used their own music because the station didn't have like the lesbian collection. So Elena didn't have that much. So she had met us. I met my partner Carol through the Association of Women's Music and Culture, which is a now defunct organization, AWMAC. Where we also met Elena Bouvier. So Elena started using our music, and I had read some of my poetry on the air. So I introduced myself to the new unnamed host in this fax and said, while I was going for your job, the receptionist told me you've been hired, so congratulations, and I'd be happy to volunteer. Here are the ways I've helped in the past. Let me know. Time goes by, I don't hear from anybody. And I get a call from Bob Bombera, who's still at the station. He does news. He's the news director. Bob was supervising that position at the time, and he said, thanks for your fax. The receptionist was mistaken. We don't have a permanent host. We just have these series of kind of, temporary hosts, and I was really intrigued by your letter, so why don't you come in and we'll talk. And I basically talked myself into the job. I convinced them that while I hadn't done radio, I had done lots of different kinds of performance, and I was very comfortable on a mic. And give me a shot. And they did. Wow. And that was 1996. Wow.
I made a conscious decision that I wanted to work with Philadelphia because I thought Philadelphia was a workable city, and I wanted to make it the most gay-friendly city in America. And I thought, if using my theory about education, we could do that. And I think we've done it. And I do that to this day. Next practical step was working with state government, and so I contacted Governor Milton Schaap and asked him if he would meet with a group of gay activists, and to my shock, in 1975, Milton Schaap became the first governor in America to meet with gay activists. Up to that point, no governor, nobody of that high level had ever met with gay people, because Schaap's real name was Shapiro, and he understood what discrimination was. He had to change his name to run for public office. He knew what discrimination was. And he created the nation's first official governmental body to actually look into the problems of gay people, which was called the Governor's Commission for Sexual Minorities.
We never had sex in college, but we played what were called cockfights, and we would wrestle with each other, and part of the wrestling was groping each other. And that never got farther than that. I suspected that it would have, because this is one semester in college. We were rooming on the same floor. We became very close, and physically we got no farther than that. I suspect that he was no more advanced sexually than I, that he may have experimented this and that. I don't think that he had an emotional sexual relationship with another man. I think that this is as close as either one of us had, but I wanted to include that. Because baby, in one semester, that isn't bad.
Definitely.
Well, and Hank and I, and as I said, I don't know how it sort of like started and then went a little further and went a little further, and we would always giggle after it, and it, as I say, never went further than wrestling with our clothes on, and we would be a little bit venturesome in groping each other too. But as I say, it never went that way. We were delivering our laundry, so we were running down 4 flights of stairs, and my arm went up to open the door. It had one of those treadle kind of things on the door, and instead of opening the door, I went through a pane of glass.
Ouchie.
And I cut from here to here.
Oh, wow.
And Bucknell, incidentally, was my father's alma mater. He had gone there. And so Hank immediately went white. He was a white guy anyway. Didn't know what to do. Panicked, ran off, and was yelling, screaming, "Help, help, help." And here I am holding my hand, and I walked myself to the nursery or dispensary or what, and this old woman who must have remembered my dad when he was there couldn't stop the bleeding. She was leaning up against it like this. And finally I went to the hospital, got stitches in and a cast like this, and the doctor told me, don't move like that, you know, because everything was stitched up, and there were arteries and veins on the inside and so on and so forth. So that after that I dropped out of Bucknell and went home to my parents in Red Bank. Actually, at this time we were living in Little Silver, the next town, and then my aunt, my mother's sister, who lived in Philadelphia, said, well, why doesn't he come and convalesce with me?
Why?
I think she just decided that she would give me a break. I'd get out of the little town and come to the big city, and she didn't live within the city limits. She lived in Upper Darby, just outside the city. And she had a row house there. And she got, then after that I was getting around, and I decided to go downtown and look for a job, and I got a job. My first job here was at Wanamaker's, and it was a department store here, and I got a job at the lamp department. At that time, department stores had whole floors, and this quarter of the floor was only lamps and so on and so forth.
Once in a while, I was not a late night person, but friends would say, come on Friday, let's go over and have a drink, watch the Go-Go Boys at the 247, you know, go to the Venture Inn for dinner. It was very good for dinner. And I knew people who were telling me stories about where they were going and what they were seeing and doing. And then parties where you would go and meet friends of friends. Yeah, they had the Go-Go Boys at the 247 bar, and they would dance on the top of the counter, and you had your dollars and you could put it into their G-string. I don't know if they have it anymore.
Mayor Nutter had a longer relationship with the community, the LGBT community, and was starting at a different place than Mayor Street started. Mayor Street, when he left, was in a totally different place than when he started, too. But there was really no love for him when Mayor Street started. Mayor Nutter comes in with a lot of support, and it's sort of widely acknowledged that he, you know, of the folks that really backed him from the earliest time, he was the true underdog. I'm not sure how much you know about that campaign, but he was a true underdog. But the folks who supported him from the earliest time of them were members of the LGBT community, in part because, of his track record on LGBT issues. The domestic partner bill, which passed in late 90s, and which then provided domestic partner benefits for all city employees, that was hugely significant, more than just for the city. I mean, it was, private businesses then followed suit if they didn't already have it. It also established a relationship recognition program called Life Partnership, which is the closest thing that we have to any kind of marriage. It's a relationship recognition. And it's a registration, and any of the taxes that the city controls, folks who are registered as life partners are treated in the same way in the eyes of any city taxes. So it really comes into play with property, if you own joint property, and if you're transferring property to each other. So I knew a lot of folks who were applying, definitely folks who could have lent a lot. I knew that I was bringing experience with services, and I had been working and had been providing services to some of our most at risk and in need people for a long time, and I understood that. Like, that is really where everything that I've done has been about that. And so it's like I know it. I know the city. I'm a Philadelphian. This is my hometown, and so I get it, and I care, and I know a couple things. And so at the end of the day, I decided to apply because of that. When Mayor Hutter came in, he was like, "Send me your resumes." Right? That's literally what he said. Right? We're hiring. Right? So he said it on the day of his inauguration. Send me your resumes. So there wasn't like a clear way to apply. So I figured out how to apply, sent it in. Their process was almost wrapping up. And then a couple days later, I got a call to meet with the mayor. And so this is like the second interview. What I didn't know is that the mayor really doesn't do the second interviews. He liked to make the offer, right? So this was the offer. It was still an interview. We met in the next room over in his office. And, I grew up here at a time when City Hall is the tallest building in the city, right? So, like, just coming in here was like nervous, My interview was on a Saturday with the mayor. And so, we had a great conversation, and then, I was offered the job.
Because they were having trouble introducing the gay rights bill, and I thought I could do it. I always feel that if I set my mind to something, I can get it done. I harassed the hell out of the city council people until they did it. I did. Yeah, I basically parked myself in City Hall. And I was in their offices every single day, and I wouldn't leave until I found 2 council people who would introduce the legislation. I had long hair, jeans, and a pullover shirt. I had no money for fashion. I had no money for haircuts. I had holes in my shoes. And I just went up in city council and basically lobbied. We were able to produce what we called, if I can recall it, I don't recall the name of it, but we would do a weekly mimeographed newsletter of gay rights successes around the nation. And I would hand it to each and every council person every single week. So I think we called it City Council Gay Newsletter. Yeah, it was specifically just for city council people.
And then after a while, I think she got a little tired of me and said, "Why don't you go live with your uncle?" And my uncle, who was a dermatologist and had his residence and office just off of the Oxford Circle in northeast Philadelphia. And I had my job working for Wanamaker's. And so I went to move in with him. A move-in that lasted approximately 8 years. He was a bachelor, and as I said, later on, later on I found out he was gay. He found out about me early. So here I was, about 18 or 19. I got to the big city. Remembrances of New York City and what happened in Greenwich Village came by, and then I decided to explore. So that's sort of like chapter 2 of my life. And it was like a giant theme park. And speaking of parks, at one time, it wasn't only restrooms that I found out about, but one of the big cruising areas was Rittenhouse Square. And I don't know about it today, but at the time, in the evening, and especially on weekends during the afternoon, people would just walk around and cruise in Rittenhouse Square. And I don't know whether it was the first time, but I remember one time somebody picked me up and we were walking to his apartment, and we sat down in his apartment in town, not far from there, and I guess he got me a drink, and I'm sipping the drink, and he looked at me and he said, "Are you gay?" Now I said, "Wait a minute, I just met you at Rittenhouse Square. We're walking home and going to your apartment, but I think what happened is at the time I didn't pick up the mannerism that gay men had. And so I was new to this, and I was probably used to maintaining the facade that I had for years and years, and I guess I was fooling even him. So I guess I had to learn some of the gay nuances, if I were to cruise successfully.
It may have had some influence on the subsequent 3 or 4 Philadelphia mayors, because my credentials were really pretty good for being the health commissioner for the city of Philadelphia. But I know I was seriously considered by 3 subsequent mayors, but not actually appointed. The closest I came to being appointed, there was an interesting little story too. Was Wilson Good, who was the first black mayor of Philadelphia. And he knew me, and in fact, I just was looking over here, some photographs of a fundraising party for him that was right in this room where you're sitting. And he almost appointed me city health commissioner, but as I understand the story, the position of city health commissioner was not considered a very important position. And so it was the last position that he was appointing. He did not appoint me city health commissioner, but he did appoint me the first openly gay member of the city's Commission on Human Relations.